Good evening, everyone. If you don't know who I am Susan Damiani, and I am the Director of Gift Planning and the McAllen Society at St. John's University. You may not have seen me for a couple of the power hours, so it's so nice to be back on again. I don't know what number we're up to, but I know the number is quite high with all the different power hours we've been doing since the start of the pandemic. And I'm really excited about this one. Always excited when we have our young graduates coming back and giving back to the university. That makes me, as an alumna, I feel very happy to see that they wanna share their talents with their alma mater and with their fellow alumni. So I introduced to you Dylan Hammond. Dylan, thanks so much for coming on, taking time out, because it sounds like the work you're doing could be quite exhausting. And you could be resting right now and relaxing tonight, and you're on a call here with St. John's. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. I have here also Dr. Susan Rosenberg, who is the founding director of the St. John's Museum Administration MA. She's a professor of art history at St. John's University. I've been working with her for many years. She's super talented. I'm so glad that she was able to get this master's program going at St. John's. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And when you hear what Dylan has to say and what he has to share in his experiences, you'll know why this program is so fantastic. Let me give you a little bit of background about Susan, and then I'll also go to Dylan, and then we'll get right to this exciting discussion. Susan, because she's teaching museum studies, is because she worked in New York museums for 20 years. Previously a curator of modern and contemporary art. In addition, she's published in international museum catalogs and art journals, and she even showcased her research at the United States and international conferences. And also she's held a discussion with the architect Elizabeth Diller, whose projects include the Broad Museum of Modern Art, New York's High Line, the Shed, the ICA, and Boston, at the Broad Museum in Los Angeles. So thank you, Susan, again for your time. The star of the show here is Dylan Hammond. Dylan, like I said, is a young graduate. He graduated from the Museum Administration program in 2018. He also graduated from Wilmington College of Ohio with a degree in history and education. He's presently living in Virginia. And the most important part, and why you're here to listen to all this great stuff, he is on a team. His team is overseeing the movement of the museum collection for a 7-year project to revitalize the National Mall building and transforming gallery spaces. He's working on the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. And just in the little run through that we had with Dylan, you will see, I even asked him this question, right, Dylan? Did you know anything about planes or aeronautics or anything like that? When he starts talking, you're going to think that he had a career or was in the military or something. In 2 years, I cannot believe all the information you've absorbed. So I find this career very fascinating, because I think you can learn so much and enhance your personal life, as well as the work that you're doing is going to enhance the entire country. That I can't wait to come and visit the museum in DC. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan and Dylan, and I hope you enjoy this evening's discussion. Thank you for joining the Power Hour. Appreciate it. I'm going to take my video off now so we can focus on the both of you. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us both, Susan, and thank you, Dylan, for agreeing to this conversation, which we're going to try to rein in because there's just so much to talk about. So just to sort of ease us into your career path after graduation, you don't have to go through all the details, but I know the story of how you got this job is pretty interesting, because I was wondering if you could share that story with everyone.
Sure. Yeah. So after I graduated from St. John's, I was working in an art gallery in New York City. One thing led to another, and basically it was kind of I did what they wanted me to do, and then that job disappeared because they didn't have anything for me to do. So I kind of started looking, and I found an opportunity in DC, and it was one of those where they needed art handlers and art people to move artifacts, but they said that it was a part of a major museum move, and that's all the information I got. So I didn't find out that I was going to be working in the Air and Space Museum until after I had gotten hired by that company, because in the span of my interview and a bunch of the paperwork phase, then the contract was finalized and things like that. So they had to keep it pretty close to the vest of what they were doing, because they were hiring some people and getting everything ready for a project that they hadn't officially been given yet. Because all these types of projects, and a huge project like deinstalling all of the galleries at the National Air and Space Museum, is a huge undertaking that is planned out years and years and years in advance. So as the timelines came down, I got hired on with Crozier Fine Arts to be a part of their team who was going to move the museum. I did that for about just over a year. And then I was hired on to work kind of on the other side with the Air and Space Museum, overseeing contractor movement and just a lot of the general artifact movements related to the project.
Okay, I'm just going to just briefly go back because I want to say it was already sort of foretold that you would be really like the perfect person for this job, because when you were at St. John's, you were like the expert. You took over the gallery during a period when we didn't have a gallery director, when we were hanging the museum administration students curatorial project in the gallery. You were the installer, and you were like already a professional art installer, which is a very, high level, very experienced position. So I just want to say that, and I also want to say that I remember getting an email from you before you told me what was going on, where you said, I handled John Glenn's spacesuit today. Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah, that was like a couple weeks into the job, and it was one of those things where we were deinstalling the original gallery, discussing the trips to the and the goal of reaching the moon. And one of John Glenn's flight suits was in that gallery, and it was kind of one of those crazy moments of, in the heat of working, I was kind of like, okay, cool, I've got to do this, this, and this, make sure that this suit is secure so that we can ship it the 30 miles down the road to go into storage. But like, kind of as I thought about it, it was one of those things where like, this is really cool, especially being from Ohio and hearing all the stories of Glenn and so many other astronauts who came from that area. It was definitely really cool. And I've gotten to work with a lot of objects that I never could have imagined that I would have been a part of. And 5 or 6 years ago, while I was in college, there's no chance that I would have ever imagined that this is what I would have been doing.
And that was just the beginning. So do you want to, I wonder if you could just give the audience a little perspective on what this means for the Air and Space Museum to be doing this right now. I mean, I remember, I'm so old, I remember going when the museum opened in 1976. So can you just say how major the project is that you're involved with, and then also more about your role, your team, from the big picture to sort of your daily role?
Yeah. So yeah, the National Air and Space Museum officially opened to the public in 1976, but they had been collecting as part of the Smithsonian for 70 plus years before that. The oldest object in our collection has an 1800s number on it. So the collection itself had grown as the Smithsonian grew. But in the 70s, it was finally given a place to go. And that year, or the year prior to that, when things were being installed, was the last time a large number of our galleries changed. Sure, there were updates here and there as like history, like major events and our understanding of major events changed, but more than half of the galleries didn't change from 1976 to when they were closed to the public in 2018. Some of our galleries are still open, but a number of them that dating from either they opened to the public in 1976, they opened as kind of short-term galleries, but ended up staying a little bit longer, opened a little bit later. And then we have some galleries that kind of, it needed a revitalization, so it got one. And then this project kind of got a hold, and was, so some are a little bit newer. But the logistics of moving something like an airplane is a little bit different than packing up a show at the Met or at MoMA or something like that. So the time that it took to get some of those things done, because things like the 1903 Wright Flyer, it can only move so many times because it's 100, and here soon, by the time that gallery opens to the public, that airplane will be 120 years old. And it is one of, if not the first major flight ever. Before that, there were gliders and things like that, but it was the first real flight, non-man-powered flight. And so this project is about taking the things that were old and making sure that we're presenting them in a modern and fresh perspective, and making sure that we are telling history the best of our abilities, rather than, whereas previously, depending on what the world looks like, that determined how we put things in our museum. If an exhibit included a Russian airplane and went up in 79, that's going to be real different than it going up now. So we're kind of going back and making sure that on a broader scale that those things are rectified. When it comes to kind of my job specifically, my team is kind of, everyone on my team is responsible for multiple galleries and overseeing, kind of making sure that from the beginning design phase all the way through to installation, that our collection is being kept safe. That is kind of our number one priority when it comes to all of this. It's all well and good if you can make a new gallery and a new fresh perspective, but if the things that are in it aren't safe anymore, then that's a huge problem. So making sure that the cases we're getting are safe, and that these things that really weren't meant to move like this are being moved safely.
Okay, I just want to zoom out for a second. So we're kind of talking about 50 years of aviation history that this museum has to account for now, right?
In some cases, yeah.
So how far into the present will the museum represent space travel exploration?
I think that we're trying to make sure that we're set up so that we're not just covering things that have already happened, that we're looking at the future of space travel. And right now is the best possible time to be doing that, with a combination of NASA run expeditions to Mars to privately funded space travel, the money being put into science, engineering, specifically around the idea of aeronautics and space travel, is more now than it ever was before, even with inflation. And so it's about kind of merging where we started to where we're going. It's in the grand scheme of world history, 1903 to that first flight, to in the 40s breaking the sound barrier for the first time, to 1969 having the first man step on the moon. That is not a great distance when it comes to history in general. And there's even less time between the Wright flyer and Apollo 11 than there was from then till now. So the change in that industry and that technology has changed so much, and we're trying to kind of follow that path of making sure that we're talking about where we started, the highlights of what we achieved and what we can achieve in the future.
So I'm wondering, like, rather than just ask you to describe all of the aircraft that you've laid your hands on, taken apart, reinstalled, moved, taken care of, do you want to just, I know you put together some wonderful images for us about that show kind of the behind the scenes of what's going on at the museum. Do you want to talk about that now with some images?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I think, great, cool. So I'm just going to let you narrate your.
Sure. So I picked this one out just because kind of this is kind of an emblem that's going to be embedded or is embedded in our new floor. Anybody who went to the museum before knows that it was carpeted before, which when you need to move a 5,000-pound engine isn't necessarily ideal. So our new design is going to be beautiful, and there are a number of different quotes like this throughout the museum and throughout the different galleries. I always thought this one, I've always enjoyed this quote. The story of Amelia Earhart is one that our museum really takes seriously. We have one of her planes, and we really make sure that we're talking about women in aviation and just her contributions to aviation in general outside of being a woman, because her contributions are unprecedented for her time. And so I think it's great that this is something that like the museum itself is doing rather than necessarily a curatorial design type of decision, but making sure, like I mentioned before, that we're paying attention to where we came from. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is kind of like from across the street picture. This is a bit older. The museum looks a little bit more complete right now, but the really interesting thing is just the difference between what the stone looks like. The closest part of the building is the new stone, and then the farthest part of the building you can see is like the older stone. It looks so much nicer. The building itself had a much needed facelift, and that allowed for just general structural changes when it comes to just buildings are built differently now than they were in the early 70s. So making sure that the museum is a safe environment for people, for our artifacts and things like that, and making sure that it is in fact climate controlled rather than climate controlled in air quotes.
Right.
Because when there's a draft in a museum, that's not necessarily air control. But so I always think this is interesting because a lot of people don't just walk through downtown DC or this area of DC very much, especially people who are based in New York. So this is just a cool image of seeing what the museum looked like a couple months ago, kind of as it was being put back together. If you want to go to the next picture. So this is fairly new. This is the America by Air gallery. It is focused on kind of commercial aviation and general aviation and things like that. So early airliners and civilian travel with aircrafts. So kind of right down in the bottom corner, you can see we have a nose of a 747 jumbo jet that you can walk into. You can see the cockpit. It's really cool. That object, even though it's not really an object in our collection, is always going to kind of hold a special place in my heart because I spent like a week or two covering it in plastic. That's one of the objects that kind of are one of the big ones where we can't actually remove it from the museum because it got put there when part of the building wasn't there. So we would need to remove a good part of the wall in order to even get it out. So that was one of the items that was protected on site. It was given a climate controlled environment, which meant that we needed to protect it. So it was covered with 3,000 feet of plastic and 3,000 feet of fire resistant protective foam so that they could build a structure around it, which I spent a lot of time doing.
So just to highlight, if I understand what you're saying, and there are a few cases in the history of art museums, the museum was built around the aircraft. The aircraft were not moved into parts of this museum. And that happened in like the case of Richard Serra's sculptures in Bilbao, where they, the sculptures, and then they completed the architecture, right? Is that that's what you're kind of telling us?
Yeah.
Right?
So when they redid this gallery the last time, they removed part of the window wall.
Right.
And it was put in during that time.
Got it.
And kind of this one really shows one of the major needs of our museum is making sure that our building could support the things that were going in it. When museums in general are built, they don't necessarily have to make sure that they have a way to route and support what will most likely end up being 1 million pounds of things in them. So like a lot of the objects you see kind of right in front of this picture, the one right above, all the airplanes sitting there are all hanging from the ceiling. So the building had to be re-supported in order to make that happen.
Wow.
If you want to go to the next one. This one's cool. This is an engine. This is a Rolls-Royce aircraft engine off of, forgetting which type of airplane they use these on, but it's one of those things where you really get to see what we had to do. We were taking things that are huge and kind of putting them on flatbed trailers and driving them down the road. So when an art show is moving, you put things in crates, load them into a tractor trailer, and you drive it down the road. This engine obviously doesn't fit in a tractor trailer. It can't be moved easily by a couple people. So the heavy machinery required to do some of these jobs is enormous when it comes to forklifts and cranes and things like that, to make sure that we can move things safely for the objects. And when it comes to things like this, making sure that the people involved are safe. This one is, so you can't really see it because it's covered, but that is one of the Skylab capsules. So basically, kind of, it's the same type of capsule used in the Apollo program. It's just its mission was a little bit later. It was one of the return modules to bring people home from Skylab, which was one of the first manned stations in space. It weighs something like 14,000 pounds, and we needed to pull it by hand, the equivalent of like a city block and a half.
So how many people are on your team that you're supervising?
So, I mean, I don't necessarily specifically supervise anybody, but I am one of the people. So like this picture is from when I was still with Crozier Fine Arts. So like Crozier as a company was responsible for like moving that object. If this were happening now and I was one of the people there, I would be kind of one of the people who is a part of that discussion and making sure that how they're going to move it is safe, making sure that it's safe for the object, it's the best way to handle the object, and making sure that it's the best way that those things can happen.
Could we pause for a second just to talk about, so Crozier, I know Crozier as an art storage and art handling and art movement place. I made a lot of visits to Crozier to see art and storage, but here's Crozier handling like heavy aircraft. So we were talking before, like, so these are being handled with the care of an artwork. But do you want to talk about that? Like, they're not really artworks, they're like more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that that's a good way to put it. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where here in DC, Crozier is one is the largest company to handle certain things like that, and they handle what they can handle, and then there are other people that come in to do the more specific stuff. So they have professional riggers that they use to make sure that we are lifting some of these things safely. They have professional aircraft mechanics that they're working with and aircraft restorers who are making sure that when they're responsible for taking an aircraft apart or they're responsible for putting an aircraft back together, that those things are happening correctly. They have brought in a great team, and I had the pleasure of working with all of them when I was with Crozier. There's one person in the world who could handle when it comes to the aircraft in our collection, and they have him working with them, and he was one of the people who disassembled the Spruce Goose and shipped it. He has been working with historic aircrafts for decades, and then they kind of, when it comes to the general stuff, they hire people like me who have a lot of museum experience, have a lot of object handling experience, and they train them to, in the simplest of terms, make it bigger. Because you kind of look at things the same. It's just there are a few extra variables when you're dealing with things that are this size and are this shape or are this specifically fragile in ways that a general kind of art handler or art installer isn't going to understand. So it's a lot about bringing in people who have museum collections experience and then getting them accustomed to our collection, because our collection is not, other than air and space themed museums, our collection is very specific. And even to other air museums, our collection is a good bit larger and more specific when it comes to the things that we're specifically dealing with and the amount of things that are moving during this small window of time.
But one of the things I'm just going to, you were bringing this up to me, and I thought it was so fascinating, is that, a painting is made by a single human being. But to get to the point of creating any entity that's going into space at any point in the history of aviation, we're talking about a collective human endeavor. And you were also bringing up the issues of value to me. So I'll let you go, but that was so fascinating when you brought that up. But this is a gorgeous photo. Where are we?
So that is in our museum. We are moving an F1 engine from one end of the building to the other, which there were 5 of these mounted on a Saturn V rocket, which was the rockets used during the late Apollo era. This specifically is one of the heaviest objects that we've had to move to date. If I'm remembering correctly, it's close to 20,000 pounds. And it took a lot of heavy equipment and a lot of engineering to make sure that this could even happen. And I don't have any pictures of it, but this is actually an object that when our Destination Moon Gallery opens to the public, that you can walk underneath to just understand the sheer size of this type of thing. You can see it a little bit here just because of like the people standing next to it and just the sheer size of it. But when the gallery opens to the public, it's hanging from the ceiling and you will be able to walk under it and just really experience like what it was like when a technician was getting ready for a rocket launch and walking under the platforms and making sure that all of those systems are good to go. So this is a cool picture. Kind of a lot of the things that we've had to do happen at night because an operation like this just can't happen when we're open to the public. So we're making sure that we're taking all the precautions and making sure we're doing things safely. This picture was probably taken somewhere between 11 at night and 3 or 4 in the morning. And this aircraft specifically is one of our more important. It's the North American X15. It's a test aircraft. This one specifically was piloted by Neil Armstrong. If anybody saw the movie First Man, the X-15 that he's flying in that movie is this airplane. I mean,
Wow.
computer generated, but it has the same tail number. And so this aircraft specifically posed a lot of different interesting problems because of what this was for, this didn't come apart because it wasn't supposed to. So this shipped down the road on the highway with only a few of the pieces that you see here missing. But all of the major components were kind of all intact as it was rolling down the road.
That must have been pretty thrilling.
It was definitely interesting. I think it was one of the more nerve-wracking things. This one was happening kind of in the heart of us really getting aircraft moved out. And so we always have to take extra precautions when we're doing things at night, especially because this required us to pick it up with a crane, swing it around the building, and then place it onto a trailer. So this is one of the galleries a long time ago that I've been working on. This gallery looks very different in this picture than it does now. A lot more things have been put in. But this is kind of what one of our galleries looks like in its early stages of getting things installed. A lot of the electrical systems, mechanical systems, and lighting go in. Some of the walls and things start to show up, but really early on in the process, we're getting things up into the air. This specific airplane is really interesting. It's an early air racing airplane, and its pilot, Roscoe Turner, was one of the most eccentric people in aviation history. He's best known for having a lion in the cockpit with him that they named Gilmore as a kind of mascot for Gilmore Oil. So that is kind of something that, and this gallery specifically is focusing on speed. So when that comes to rockets or air racing or even sailing cars and motorcycles and all types of different things. This is another aircraft that went in. This is a much more modern example of an air racing aircraft. This is one of the lighter aircrafts that we've put in. This one weighs well less than a normal car. It's for air racing and air acrobatics. And so those two aircraft are kind of part of the key pieces of that gallery being installed.
Why Nemesis? Who named it?
So it's part of its pilot John Sharp created that name. These were actually sold as kits that you could build yourself in air racing. So which you can do now, kind of buying the pieces to a Cessna or one of those things. This is kind of one of those early kit car type of things where you can order the pieces, but he just did it better than anyone else.
Wow, it's beautiful.
We have this one, and we actually have another one of his airplanes that is a little bit of a later model. This was kind of really one of the first airplanes that made him famous in air racing. So this object is one of those ones where working at the Air and Space Museum, there's a lot of things I've gotten to work with that I never expected I would. A 1965 Corvette is definitely on that list. There's a beautiful car lent to us by the National Corvette Museum in Kentucky for our Nation of Speed gallery. And it is, this picture specifically is really interesting to me because we did exactly what you're seeing. Like, we loaded it off, we rolled it off the truck, rolled it down one length of our museum, put it in the freight elevator, took it up to the second floor, and rolled it down the rest of the way. They brought one of their interns who got to sit in the driver's seat and make sure we were going straight and steer and everything like that. So this is definitely one of the ones that it was really cool to kind of push a Corvette through the museum, especially kind of considering that a little bit earlier models of Corvettes were some of the ones, and a little bit later were given to some of the astronauts. So there are a ton of stories coming out of from Cape Canaveral of, if you've ever been there, there's that really long driveway leading into it. There are a lot of stories of astronauts racing their Corvettes on their way home from work.
So I have to interrupt you. Did you visit Cape Canaveral as part of your job?
I've actually never been there.
Okay.
I want to go at some point.
You know it. You know it well.
Yeah, I know a lot of the things that are there. A lot of the things that they have on display there are things that are in our collection that we have kind of loaned back to them to make sure that kind of we are set up for the future, so that if they don't want something on display or they don't want something anymore, we've already covered that those capsules and different important things like that are already in our collection. So if they don't want to put them on display anymore, they come right back to us.
That's really interesting, just for students who are thinking about collections management, that there's an acquisition, like not even in a driving distance away, but that it's in your collection.
Yeah.
That's exciting. That's very interesting for the future, like a future vision of what the collection can be.
And there are even some that a lot of the ones that are at Cape Canaveral have never been to our museum. And
Right.
some of them never will. There are
Right.
a number of objects that we hope never will actually make it to our museum, because that means that we just moved an intact Saturn V rocket from Houston to Washington, D.C. We have a full Saturn V rocket in our collection, but there's no way for us to get it from Houston to here. So it's on display in Houston, and unless something drastic changes, it will be there for especially the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think anyone really probably knew that there was like an arm of the Air and Space Museum, a collection, a historic collection at Cape Canaveral itself. So that's really cool. But let me keep your story going, although I'm loving this Corvette car. I've never seen something so beautiful.
So this was kind of one of the things that this is kind of one of the really cool things about my job, of like, as we're getting things in, sometimes things in our collection that we're collecting come from other museums. Sometimes they're given to us from collectors or a branch of the US government. But this one specifically was, like, the guy standing next to me is the pilot of this airplane. He flew this plane for a really long time. And he is on the top of the list of some of the coolest people I've ever met, because for decades he was an air acrobat, an air racer, and you've got to be made of something pretty special to be able to just convince yourself that that's a good idea. So this one was really cool, and being able to work with him to unload the truck that had his airplane on it was definitely a really cool experience. And this plane specifically was given to us by Oracle, the sponsor of this airplane, while he was flying it on his behalf, which was really great that they stepped in to make sure that this could be in our collection and be on view for years to come. And the next picture is the start of where it's going to spend the rest of its life. This airplane spent a lot of time upside down and performing air acrobatics. So it's only fitting that it spends the rest of its life in our museum in that fashion. When you walk into this gallery, you come face to face with this airplane upside down, because you get to experience, by looking at it like this, what that was like. And anybody who had been to was familiar with air shows and following those around the country is going to see this airplane and a lot of people are going to have stories of when they saw this when they were at an air show back where they were from. And kind of that previous picture is kind of one of those examples of making sure that we're not just showing airplanes kind of sitting on the ground as objects and things like that. These are really important objects to history, but also we want to show them in a way that portrays them in their best light and make sure that they are giving off what you would have experienced when you saw that airplane in real life. This picture, or the previous picture, was one of my favorite airplanes ever to work on. That plane is the oldest bomber aircraft in existence. It's a French bombing aircraft from World War I, and it was one of the coolest things that I've ever been able to be a part of. And this picture specifically as well. That airplane is the first production jet aircraft ever. This is a German airplane from 1944, and it was the first jet plane to see real combat. And kind of it being in one of our galleries, our previous galleries focused on the early era of jet aviation, and being able to work on that was really cool. And one of the interesting things that kind of I've experienced in the past, because of this airplane, we sometimes airplanes, and when you just are dealing with machinery, there are places where oil goes that you can't always get out. So every now and then, this airplane specifically had a lot of oil left in its system. It ruined a really nice pair of khaki pants. But it was really cool because that's not something you ever think of. Like, we do the best we can to make sure that we drain the fluids and drain all of that out. But just like in your car, on like a cold day or something like that, a little bit of oil comes out because it ended up somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. Not a big deal. But when you're talking about a historic aircraft or something like that that's now on display, it's a little bit different of an issue. And there
People
were
coming to collect it and analyze it or anything like that when it, no.
Really, I mean, it's what that type of thing is made of hasn't really changed. And we have a lot of airplanes that happens to. And that's one of the issues of there aren't very many people left who were a part of some of these projects.
Right.
There are a number of people still at the Air and Space Museum that I get to work with every day who were there for some of the installs of these airplanes in the 70s, which is really cool. But if they specifically didn't work on an airplane and somebody else did, like, they may not know that there's 3 or 4 gallons of oil still left in one of the tanks, which is one of the things that we found with a different airplane, that it ended up having like 5 gallons of fluid still in its system. And it kind of, we were in process of taking it apart, removed one of the fuel lines because it needed to come off in order to do something else. A couple seconds passed and it just started coming out. So a lot of things that we're dealing with are things that were never, when they were put there, they weren't necessarily put there in the easiest way to get them out again. And
Awesome.
this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where for a lot of our larger airplanes that have to move at night, because something that wide just isn't allowed to be on the road during the day, we have to crane it out of our West Terrace and put it onto a trailer and get everything secured. So this is one of those really cool images that a lot of people would never see, because this was probably happening at 11 o'clock at night or later. So
No press release went out.
yeah, I mean, and some of the planes did. Like there's a Washington Post article about this process for the X15.
Ah,
But a lot of them, this isn't something that you normally get to see. So it's really interesting, because like I was there when this happened, and kind of for me now, this is standard operating procedure, but this is not something that I would have ever expected to have been a part of. And it's also not something that someone who kind of just goes to visit a museum is like, oh, that's really cool. And then that's it. Like, it's like they read the story and then
right.
kind of the end of it, they move on. You don't really get to see or really think about a lot of times in a museum what it took to get that thing where it is. And that's a much grander task for a lot of the things that we're working with because of their sheer size.
Yeah, that's what is so wonderful to hear you speak about, is the life of these objects to you. And it's not just the life of the objects, it's the life of the people connected to the object that you've had connection to. And I just wanted to say to anyone's listening that Dylan did not enter this job as an aerospace or space history expert at all. And it's just your passion. I guess when you get that intimate with something, right? This object, you have to, it's just, why would you just think of it as like some tools you're moving around? You have to embrace the history that's in your hands, the weight of that. It's not just the literal weight, it's the weight, right?
Yeah.
Of history that I feel when you talk about your job, that's what's the passion that I hear, is that you appreciate. It's not just a thing. It's not just an object.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where like I absolutely love what I do, and I don't know what I would do if I wasn't doing this right now. But that's not really something that I was at where I was a couple years ago. One of my friends from growing up, when he heard what I did, he was like, well, that's really cool. And like, that's not just like you have a cool job. That's like you hit the jackpot of you have a cool job, when 7-year-old you would be like, that's really cool. And so like that was something that like kind of really struck me, because it's like there's a lot of people who love doing what they do. But like, does 7-year-old you think that it's really cool to be an accountant? Maybe. 7-year-old me would think that this is really cool. And like I think that that's kind of the best part, and that's why I get into learning about the things that I'm dealing with, because it takes a lot to just do the thing. So I might as well know why it's important that we're putting all of this work in to make sure that this stuff is available for everyone to see. So there are some things, and a lot of the things that I've personally gotten to work with are going to stay closer in my mind, because I know how to take it apart, and I know how to put it back together, and that's not something I'm ever going to forget.
Yeah, you didn't really go into so much detail about that level of like just mechanical knowledge that you've gained, the material knowledge, the mechanical knowledge, the historical knowledge, and then, you are his trained historian. So I think you also have the museological perspective to understand what this new installation is going to mean in terms of the way, frankly, a US government museum is telling the story of space exploration and technological progress in a way that's very different than it would have during the Cold War of the 70s when the museum opened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that because of what our institution is and our connection to the Smithsonian and our vast ability to reach the American public is fantastic. And that also means that we get to work with a lot of the companies who built these things are some of the companies that are some of our biggest donors and some are our biggest contributors. We wouldn't be anywhere in our collection if it weren't for the involvement of some of these companies who they built this in the 40s, and their current iteration is a part of our museum family, and they are some of the people that we get to work with, because who better to talk to us about an SR-71 Blackbird than Lockheed Martin, who built the airplane.
Yeah, I loved when you were explaining the Oracle acquisition, which, it sort of brings it down to the sort of truth of any museum acquisition, is that they're people who make these things happen. They're donors, they're collectors. There's the flyer who's there right next to you. And he's got stories to tell about this artifact of history that no one else could tell. And
Right.
so, it just, when you talk about your job, you just really capture the, so many dimensions that you're in touch with. So I'm just wondering, I saw Susan Damiani asking, I guess we want to move into Q&A. What words of advice do you have for our students who are interested in, I guess it says in museum studies?
I think that kind of be a part of it. Like, I think my biggest, like, the best thing for me was, like, when I was in college, someone had to tell me that this was a thing. Like, I would go to museums, and I always loved going to museums, but other than that, I never considered the idea that people actually work there. And I took a class about museums, and I was like, there's something I can do in history and things like that isn't being a social studies teacher. Like, that opened my eyes to so many opportunities, and I sought out being able to work with museums as a volunteer or getting a student job or things like that, because the best way to get involved in museums is to get involved in museums. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of museums, all the way from local county historical societies to museums specific to one thing in one area, all the way up to the Met, MoMA, the Smithsonian. There are thousands of opportunities there whether it comes to part-time jobs, volunteer work, different things like that. I would not be where I am today if I didn't have the experience of going into museums and meeting some amazing people who told me how this whole thing worked. And that is something that you can't get anywhere else than meeting the people who do this for a living.
Yeah, that's such.
Yeah, you're saying internships, Dylan. Sorry, I'm going to jump in here. Dylan, the internships you would recommend on the job kind of training is helpful, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, my internship experience and my early museum experience are what led me to go to St. John's, and those experiences combined with all the experience I got at St. John's are why I ended up where I am today.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. I don't think you give yourself enough credit. When we were in the run through, you had the flexibility. I don't know, Susan, if you agree with me on this one, but Dylan was very flexible. Some people are like, I'm not going to travel to a different state. Or, what you signed on for is not what you're doing now. You took a chance, you took risks. We always hear this, and we always say, oh, that's so corny sometimes when people say, take a chance, take a risk, but you did that, and look what happened. So I think that you have to pat yourself on the back, was not everybody, no, seriously, not everyone has, the confidence to say, well, I don't know if I want to, move to a different state. I think your generation, that's what I admire about your generation. I think all of you are very flexible. You don't mind traveling here or there, going to different places or relocating. But I think it's great, really. This was really a very nice presentation. Thank you.
Add to that, Susan, that
Sure.
in my experience teaching and in my own career, it's not like a choice. It's like you have to do it.
Right.
It's like you don't think about, oh my God, I'm going to move across the country for this job, or I've never lived in that city. It's like,
Right.
I'm going to be with that collection or that curator or that place, or, it's really a passion field. And I think Dylan really captures that, and also captures the fact that it's a field that's open to people from, like people like to badmouth the liberal arts. Like, you can't get a job with an English degree. Well, guess what? The museum is
Yes.
filled with people with liberal arts degrees. Not just historians and art historians, but people who can write, people who can think, people who can research. That's who populate museums, as well as artists. And so what I
Exactly.
was going to say is, like, yes, it does. You're right. The risk, you have to have that passion and that risk and flexibility, as you said. But I think it also, when you feel it, when you have that gene, I call it, like when you have that museum DNA kind of thing, it's like, it's inescapable. Do you agree, Dylan? Or am I exaggerating?
No, I don't think so. Like hearing Susan explain it like that, like I never considered the risk that I was taking.
That's great.
I never considered that, like, when I moved to DC for 3 months for an internship, blew my entire life savings in order to do it. I never considered that a risk. And but had it not worked out, I might be thinking back to it. But it's one of those
No,
things
don't
where
ever think
even
that.
coming to
Everything's
New
an
York,
experience.
You follow your
even
instincts in
coming to New
these
York,
things. I feel that very strongly, that, yeah, there's risk, but, you make an informed decision about an informed risk that you feel based on the connections you're building and the knowledge. And, it's not like jumping off a cliff risk. It's
Right.
negotiated risk.
Well, maybe I shouldn't have said risk. Maybe you took a chance. There are some people, like you said, it sounds like in this profession, you have to have that personality. Because like you said, you're not going to maybe find something that's right down the block from where you live, right? You do have to travel for jobs like this. So that's something that if you're looking for a job in this area, that's probably one of the requirements, right?
In general, I would say, there's
Right.
certain characteristics of people in the field that I've witnessed, which is certain people they park themselves in a job. Like if they get some job at a very prestigious institution, they'll just park themselves there. They don't care if they get promoted. They're just happy to
Right.
park
Right.
at a prestigious place. They don't need to grow their salary for whatever reason. And then there are people in my field, every 3 years, it's like, what's the next, or not 3, 6, 7, whatever, but to grow in the field, sometimes you have to move.
Yes, that's very
It's
true.
unpredictable, but I think that it all makes sense looking back on it, why you made the decisions you made, why you took that crazy little job there or whatever.
Right.
And then in retrospect, it's like, of course, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have gone there or there or there.
Right.
So it's that kind of spirit, I think, that flourishes.
And what's next, Dylan? How long are you going to be working on this project? And then what's your next ambition?
I think that this project is going to be going on for a good bit longer. I'm going to be with the museum through the end of this project, and then from there, kind of, I don't know. I think there are a number of things that kind of early on I set things that I wanted to do, and a lot of those things are things that I don't want to do anymore. So kind of now when that kind of comes, it's one of those things where I want to do what I'm doing right now, and then when I can't do that anymore, I'll figure out what I'm going to do.
Good.
And I think that that's kind of how I've had a lot of my jobs, thankfully. I was able to kind of work on a lot of really great projects and kind of do a lot of things and work in different areas of museums relating to collections. So from after this, I'm gonna figure out what I want to do, and then
I'm gonna predict that
That's a plan.
it's gonna grab you. You're not gonna,
Right.
you're gonna be you're not gonna
Mm.
be reaching for it. Something is gonna grab you and just, recognize your excellence and take you to the next level.
Well, I
I hope
think
so.
you might have mentioned this, but when does the renovation, when is it fully completed?
So the museum will fully open to the public in 2026. At that point, all of our galleries will be open to the public. Might be a little bit earlier than that, but most likely late 2025 is when this project will begin winding down and get all of the major galleries open to the public.
That's great. I guess, will they have like a big reception or something, an opening
For weeks, there'll be
reception?
parties for different
sure,
sectors
right?
of the,
That's
of the
nice.
all different parts of the political,
Right, I'm
aviation,
sure,
military,
right,
donor. I mean, I can't imagine those parties are going to be quite amazing.
I'm sure.
There's going to be a couple as well. So there's kind of coming in the next year or so, there's going to be the big flip, which is basically one half of our museum is going to open to the public and the other half is going to close. A lot of the galleries on the currently open half of the downtown museum have closed to the public, but a number of our galleries are still open. And then so sometime next year, the whole museum will close, and then in 2023, the west half of the museum will open to the public.
I love
Oh,
that
interesting.
they've named it. They've got, and I don't mean to be cynical about that at all. I mean, it's brilliant. Like, you have to name these things and get the public invested in the big flip. That's exciting. That's
I
like
don't know
if you're
if
in
that's
DC,
something they call
like,
it, but
what?
I don't know if that's something the museum calls it, but we definitely call it that because we're looking at kind of as we're installing and deinstalling, it's kind of, we get to that middle point and
Right,
these ones are done. These ones need to be taken apart. So
right.
We'll see if it floats up out into the ether of the media by the time it happens, that's what it's called, because it's a pretty good marketing term for what's going to happen.
Well,
No,
I think you should get extra credit because you're really doing a great promotion and great service to your museum. Because I can't wait now to see everything, and I feel like I'm going to be, I'm more well informed now when I go. The photographs were really great, and I know what to expect in a little way. So it'll be exciting to get to see what you worked on and say, hey, I knew somebody that was involved in it. So thank you for letting us be a part of it, especially this evening. I see that we've come to the hour mark. I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion as much as I did. Like I said, it's just really nice to have an insider's view, and also coming from one of our own Johnnies, Dylan Hammond. If you're ever up in New York, Dylan, you want to see a basketball game, I don't know if you're into sports, but if you want to see a basketball game, give me a call. I'll gladly give you and a friend a ticket to the game. But thank you, Susan, for your time, and for everybody again for watching. And our next Power Hour is going to be, we're going from museums to financial planning. So just to get us ready for the new year, right?
thank you so much for inviting us, and for especially thank you to Dylan for sharing
Yes.
just a slice of what sounds like an incredible time in his life.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you. And it's all Susan. Susan came up with the idea and she reached out to me and I was so excited. I'm like, this is wonderful. And it was divine intervention because I was trying to come up with, what are we going to do Power Hour? I don't know, for some reason I usually have an idea or something sparks, and I really didn't have anything for November. And just as I was trying to think, you sent this email. I was like, was she reading my mind? Like, it was so weird. So the timing was perfect. So thank you to both. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan.
Best of luck to you, Dylan. You're gonna do fabulously. We're gonna hear from you. We're gonna probably read about you.
I'll bring you back again, right?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. We'll
Absolutely.
bring you back for the next big, huge exhibition you work on.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jill.
Bye.
Thank you, Dylan.